This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different Q's.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Karina Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Joining us again in studio is Republican gubernatorial candidate Bobby Charles. Welcome back.
It is a pleasure to be with you guys.
Yes, thank you for coming back. We know you're definitely busy schedule.
It's fun. I enjoy what I'm doing.
So out there on the campaign trail, and I know you're going all over the state, what is the most overlooked issue affecting daily life in rural and small town Maine?
You could say there's a tie, but I'm going to say it's affordability. Property taxes are the highest they've ever been in this state, and it's oppressive for seniors, and it's oppressive for young people. It's oppressive for everybody. Mine went up, everybody's have gone up. And then I would say the broader tax burden. Democrats just raised the income tax again, both personal and corporate. It's devastating. We lose 300 or 400 businesses out of this state every year. Nobody makes a big press release about it, but they go away. They either shut down or they move to Tennessee or Florida or somewhere else that the tax burden isn't as high. And then, of course, if you really want to talk taxes, they've expanded the envelope on the sales taxes. I could give you the litany here. It's really oppressive. And having worked for Ronald Reagan and looking, of course, at the success that Trump had both in his first term and more recently, when you cut taxes, you spur growth. It's a simple multiplier effect. You leave the tax dollars in the back pockets of people, and the average Mainer today pays roughly $5,000 in income taxes that we can leave in their pockets by cutting that. And if we roll back the 300 or 400 mills mandates on towns and counties, we will get property taxes back under control. And if that was the only issue I was running on, I think it would be a slam dunk.
If you were elected tomorrow, what are the first steps you'd take to ease some of this pressure on everyday budgets?
Excellent question and a simple answer. I will be cutting the living daylights out of the mill's budget, and then I will go after the waste, fraud, and abuse. This budget, I think of it this way. Maine was founded in 1820, and it took us from 1820 until the first year of the mill's administration to get to $6.1 billion in a biennial budget. In just her 7 years, she's jumped it to $11.7 billion. So now you have to ask, why did that happen? How did that happen? And of course, it is suffocating seniors. We're the oldest population in the country, by the way. So tremendous devastation for seniors who are on fixed incomes. Why all this spending? And I read the whole 800-page budget, which, to be honest, I read it line by line. It's not even the full budget. You don't really get the full budget until you get the committees of jurisdiction getting the testimony from the individual agencies. It's just a line of what they're spending it on. But you can already tell that there's $3 or $4 billion in this budget that is total and complete waste. So what's the waste? We're paying two-year housing on 8,000 illegal aliens, and even if you tell me some of them are valid, the national numbers say that maybe 5% of asylum claims are valid. I'm going to argue that those who showed up here in the state of Maine, if we do a temporary immigration court real fast and start pushing them through, and then we bring ICE in and DEA in, we're going to clean them out of here right off the top. That has all kinds of impacts. It has impacts on our medical system, on our healthcare system, on our schools. So the first thing you do is you cut the budget, and you get rid of all the solar subsidies, you get rid of net energy billing, you get rid of the wind towers that are sort of a fictional thing out of George Orwell. I mean, what could go wrong with a cement platform anchored out to sea with a 600-foot tower on it? Nobody else has done that. Nobody. But they're crazy enough to be trying to do it here in the state of Maine. Give me one hurricane and you've lost several $billion. So we lose $1.6 billion, give or take, to the energy overbilling and costs. We've got tremendous sums of money being shoveled at these illegal aliens. We also have, because the drug issue is as bad as it is in the state of Maine, we actually also have a tremendous outflow of money for public safety that if you could get the traffickers out of here once and for all, which I think we can do, and I did that all my life, we know how to do this, then you return sanity to the state. The dollars are the big issue. You cut and then you get rid of the income tax. I am sworn to get rid of this income tax within 4 years. People will then have dollars left. Roughly $3 billion will get left in the private sector. The multiplier effect of leaving $3 billion in the private sector is unbelievable. Growth will explode here. And we will bring, Mississippi was the last state, I think 18 months ago, to get rid of the income tax. We will be the 11th state. I ask people out on the campaign trail, if you had the choice to move to Mississippi or to Maine with no income tax, which would you do? Well, Maine. But Mississippi is overwhelmed right now because it's like shards of metal coming to the magnet. If you have no income tax, businesses not only stay here, kids stay here, jobs stay here, and you got growth. You'll sell more cars because more people have disposable income to buy the cars. And I use this little example now and again. One of my degrees is a master's degree in economics from Oxford, but I've also run a business for 25 years, and I ran a $2 billion operation for Powell around the world. There's some fundamentals that we have just somehow forgotten. If I leave $1 in the private sector, if I give that dollar to the government, it'll buy a bureaucrat or someone that'll push a few papers, okay, at the Department of DHS or education or somewhere else. If, on the other hand, I leave it in the private sector, let's say I leave it up in the county, and a potato farmer gets that dollar. Now that potato farmer needs to buy a tractor, and he needs to buy some other equipment, and he needs to buy fuel, and he needs to eventually get those potatoes to the market, and that's going to be more jobs, and that's going to be more dollars spent. And then once he gets them to the market, maybe instead of potatoes, he's going to turn them into potato chips. Now we need a processing plant. We need some salt. All of that is jobs. And then we need a bag, and we need to put paint on the bag, and then we need to distribute that to Hannaford or somewhere else, Shaw's. End of the day, you leave money in the private sector, everybody gets better. John F. Kennedy did it. Ronald Reagan did it. Donald Trump did it. It is time for me to do it here in the state of Maine.
So you mentioned public safety. What are your plans on that?
If there was a second monster issue, it is that one. When you put affordability beside the disintegration of our public safety in this state, we are sort of the blueprint or the poster child for doing everything wrong. We had 10,000 overdoses. Some would say 8,000 last year. We had upwards of 600 kids who died of overdoses. We have all the major drug trafficking organizations that you think of as devastating nationally. They're right here in Maine. And the reason is everything about public safety is either deterrence or appeasement. If you invite them in, they will come. If you make it crystal clear that they will be apprehended, prosecuted, sentenced, and they will spend a lot of time in prison, and we will be coordinating with the federal government, DEA, ICE, et cetera, boy, they don't want to come here. So we will never turn bad guys into good guys. We will just make the bad guys do their bad guy things elsewhere. So what does the state really look like? Every 2 or 3 weeks, the stash houses that are taken down containing fentanyl or meth or crack cocaine or heroin in this state, and we have the highest purity of heroin, the highest quantity of fentanyl we've ever seen. We're seeing carfentanil, which is 100 times more potent than fentanyl. In every 2 or 3 weeks, you take down houses that have enough drugs in them to kill the whole state. At this point, we're kind of awash. The tide has come in and covered the island, and we need to refine the island. So what I tell you is there's about 10 or 15 points that are straightforward to create deterrence. We will give the law enforcement community, again, back their authorities. They will not be considered a racist if they arrest someone on 95. Their pension will not be held over them. They will not face 3 questionnaires about whether they were profiling or biased. Obviously, if there's racial prejudice, someone will be fired. But that's not what this is about. This is about punishing people who are using a lifetime of criminal acumen in finding criminals. And by the way, I'll just tell you this because I get briefs every week from DEA. We know exactly where these drugs that are coming into Maine are coming from. They're coming from hubs in Boston. We have queued intelligence. We could almost pick the car off the highway. In a nutshell, you have to get the drug traffickers out of this state because 85% of all crime actually goes back to drug trafficking. And you might say, well, Bobby, how could that be? Burglaries and assaults and domestic violence. It's actually, believe it or not, it all goes back to this overwhelming drug trafficking in this state. So again, we have the Sinaloa cartel here. We have the Trinitarios, which are the most dangerous Dominican group here. We have Chinese traffickers in fentanyl. We have Chinese traffickers, obviously, in these Chinese grow houses that Steve Robinson's done such a good job on. But the reality is you have to go after them tooth and nail, and then you create deterrence. I'll be able to do it in 24 months. You get back to recruiting and retention for law enforcement. I have visited troops all over this state. They're down 40 and 50%. I've talked with folks in Portland. They're down 35 officers. There isn't a part of this state that is not overwhelmed right now because domestic law enforcement, local law enforcement has been in some ways bleached out of the state. They don't have the money for it. They don't have the support. An individual local constable or sheriff, despite doing everything right, is not going to be able to take down chunks of the Sinaloa cartel alone. The state troopers are undermanned, underfunded, and they need to be brought back to the top. Their authorities need to be given back to them again. They need to be properly funded. And then we need to bring in the federal assets that we're not using. If we designate all 16 of our counties as high-intensity drug trafficking areas and we get the Department of Justice and ONDCP, the Office of National Drug Control Policy, to support us up here, we will be able to become South Dakota, if you will, in the sense that they are safe. South Dakota has minimal overdoses. We have a huge number of overdoses. And then you use the same relationships as a Republican governor with the Republican administration. You bring SAMHSA money in here, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration money. So now we get the drug traffickers out of here, which gets a lot of the theft and the assaults and a lot of the crimes committed in order to get money to pay for drugs and crimes committed because people are on drugs. You get those crimes out of the state. And then you get what I like to call the get well, stay well plan in place. We are going to get rid of the giving away of 3.7 million needles. That is a complete disaster. It doesn't work. It just prolongs the pain until someone dies. We're going to get rid of those programs. We're going to drop the focus on constant resuscitation and putting people back out there and get into real treatment. There are real treatment programs. I've worked with them all my life. I have parents calling me now. I have to sit down with these kids on fentanyl. There are ways that you can end the terror and I guess I'd call it the slavery to the drug. There are ways you can get rid of this. So we get the drug traffickers out of here. So the supply chain is gone. We get people back on treatment that really works. We get prevention back in our schools again. And we restore what this state had and what some states do have. What we had was a real understanding that your public safety and your public health really matters. And all those other crimes, cars being stolen off lots, 14,000 reported domestic abuse incidents, the things that happen to kids that are just revolting, all of that stuff begins to move backwards again. And then you get accountability in your own government at DHS, at some of these places that have just been runaway disasters. I hate to say it, we live in a state that is one of the most corrupt in the country. Our state right now has everything from more than 4,500 non-compete sole source contracts, many of them going to friends and family of Democrats. And we know this from the audit. Each of those individually is a felony criminal referral. For 5 years, I was a top investigator for Gingrich in the House. We did the Waco hearings, all these. Those are criminal referrals for a felony. And I am told that when people approached the Attorney General and said, you need to impanel grand juries and go after this, he said, I'm not doing it. I think public corruption is the dark underbelly of the corruption in this state. It is a lot of it drug-related. It is not all drug-related. When you can have a president of the Senate who gives herself a $500,000 forgivable loan for a 3-person brewery, my God, she should be in stripes. There's no way that works. One of the things that the Democrats are going to be reeling from is I will not only get the drug traffickers out of here and get the taxes down and get us back to fiscal responsibility and public safety, but I am going to go after all those criminals. And I have done this. I am a litigator. I'm a Maine attorney. I'm an attorney in other states. I know how to bring them to heel. And all of a sudden, we're going to have a high integrity government again. And if the Republicans can control the House and the Senate, and I'm the governor, I work with them, and then we get the constitutional officers, within 24, 36 months, you're going to see a completely different state of Maine.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk. We are having a discussion with Republican gubernatorial candidate, Bobby Charles. The other piece of that is cashless bail. There's a public defender issue. People are caught and released 15, 20 times. We have a lack of prosecutors. What is your plan for that?
I sometimes think, Karina, that it's like walking into a house that's been hit by a hurricane. It's like, do you pick up the glass in the kitchen first or the tree that fell across the living room? Where do you begin? But your points are perfectly made. And we have some real experts in this state. Sheriffs are experts. People like Chris Martin over in Brewer, just unbelievable people. And we've got a lot of people who see this and reject it. But unfortunately, they've been sidelined or the narrative dissuades them from coming and voting. But there are very concrete things that we need to do to fix this criminal justice system. This is a criminal justice system that has essentially gone rogue. It's almost like a fallow field unplanted. We are witnessing what happens when a weed garden takes over the good plants. So what do? On the prosecutor and defender imbalance, you pull back on the defender money, you push up on the prosecutor money. You engage the law firms in this state, and I know lawyers in most of the big firms. You engage them to participate as defenders, which they are not participating as defenders right now. You literally upfund your DAs. We only have a couple of Republican DAs in this state, Neal down in Androscoggin County and a couple others. They are doing God's work. The caseload that they have is unbelievable. I don't know of a state that has a caseload that is as bad as ours. There may be one, but it's an unbelievable burden on these prosecutors. Just like changing the recruiting and retention in law enforcement, you move to get good people to step up to be DAs. And then a lot of these DAs in this state, in my opinion, they fit into my definition of public corruption. They are not principled. They are George Soros funded. If you look deeply at what they've done, I think they're not there to protect the public. I think they're there to protect an ideology that is about drug legalization and freeing felons and how everybody that ever got arrested for anything is a victim. No, that's actually not the way it works. The way it works is that those who break the law get held accountable. In every environment, of human existence, there have to be consequences with doing things that are bad. And we know that in our families, we know that in a community, and you know that at the state level. So we will upfund prosecutors. We will put a bright light on these DAs. And if you control the AG and if you're the governor, you can actually bring in both federal resources and you can use the state AG to look at these DAs one by one. I'll tell you what happens when you shine a bright light on a dark corner full of cockroaches. The cockroaches all run away. What you're going to find is these DAs are going to discover all of a sudden they actually wanted to move to Florida all their life, or they want to spend time with their family. You make them accountable. And then buck it up a notch. I was a U.S. Court of Appeals law clerk. I worked for a Reagan appointee who was also a Marine. I learned unbelievable things about how our Constitution works and what it means to keep people accountable, even at the appellate level. One of the things we need to do is replace all 7 of the leftist liberal judges on our Supreme Court. That opportunity will fall to the next governor. All 7 of those justices who are on 7-year terms, actually because of how those terms began, all 7 will come up during my tenure. I will replace all of them with conservatives. That way, when the ACLU throws a case up to the top and tries to justify things, or you get something that comes to the Supreme Court that says, hey, this referendum question is a piece of crap. This isn't real. This is intended to confuse people. The Supreme Court will say, yeah, that's right. No, it doesn't work. Go back, frame it again. I read their opinions that came out in August, including those written by Valerie Stanfill, who is somebody I know. It's honestly not just disheartening, it's deeply disappointing how ideological they've become. 2 of those opinions actually released significant drug trafficking felons. They vacated both sentences. And if you look at why they vacated them, and again, I'm a constitutional attorney. I worked at the highest levels, both in a White House as an attorney and also as a clerk to the Ninth Circuit, which is literally just below the Supreme Court. You look at these opinions, they don't stand up. One of them, you had a guy who was apprehended, you get Miranda rights, was asked if he wanted an attorney, did not say he wanted an attorney, answered all the questions. With that and the other evidence they had, he was convicted of major felony drug trafficking. And the Supreme Court, Maine's Supreme Judicial Court, looked at that case and said, reading this over, it looks as though his answers, he might have felt oppressed because he didn't seem to answer the questions as quickly and blah, blah, blah. You know what they did? They vacated that sentence. It took tens of thousands of dollars to put that guy where he was. And he was making the community safer by putting him away. I think he was an out-of-state trafficker. At the end of the day, it was a disgrace because they let this guy go. And the United States Supreme Court doesn't even have a standard that is that favorable to convicted felons versus the victim. Again, as an appellate clerk, I would have looked at that and said, this is wrong. Send it back down again. You can't do that. But we are in a situation now where we need to retool our judiciary, because that is the third branch of our government. We need to get conscientious, law-abiding, thoughtful, I would say conservative, meaning constitutionally conservative people on the bench at every level. And you need to reward them for doing the right thing. They need to be understood to be doing the right thing. You need to get rid of this cashless bail, which puts people back there again and again and again. You need to start elevating the respect we have for law enforcement, because law enforcement deserves our total respect. They get up every day, they leave their family, they put on a vest and a gun and a badge, and they go out to meet evil. As a veteran, as a guy that's worked for law enforcement all my life, someone who gets up to go out and meet evil every day deserves my maximum respect. I love the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth and the Sixth. They're very important, due process, etc. But that does not mean you endanger the community in order to facilitate an ease to crime.
The next topic I'd like to talk about is DHHS. A good friend of ours, Bill Diamond, passed away a few months ago, and a couple weeks before he did, we did a fundraiser for him and that group that he's working with at our Ford store in Augusta. And we all know that there is definitely a problem of foster kids and other young kids dying. What is your plan to fix DHHS?
This is a disgrace to the state of Maine. I talked at length with Bill Diamond, and I've talked with Betsy Grant and a number of others. People don't realize how deeply their trust has been betrayed by DHHS. It's not just the leadership. Bill Diamond was right. We lost more than 250 kids. That's an unthinkable. We should not lose a single child in foster care, not one. It's a disgrace. And then when they go before the legislature and they say, oh, we just need more money. No, that's bull. They don't need more money. They need accountability. They need to care about kids. They need to send investigators out that aren't just going out there to harass people and cover their own backsides. They need to go out there and fix the problem. One of the problems you've got, again, it'll come back to that weed garden. You leave it untended, you allow the asylees to run the asylum, and everything goes bad. It's not just foster care either. We need to protect those that are in daycare. We need to protect those that are in foster care. We need to think that the goal is actually accountability at every level. I expect to be held accountable as a governor. You should hold me accountable every single day. You think I'm doing something wrong, you should tell me. and we will get after it. And DHHS, I'll be honest with you, I'm going to probably wire brush that place. We are going to get all the incompetence out of there. We're going to get the corruption out of there, get excuse makers out of there, and we're going to put people in who are conscientious, who are dedicated to saving children's lives, and who want to make Maine a model, which is the whole idea here, is to make Maine a model for doing it right. The system is fraught, if I could say. It's filled with basically errors, unforced errors. And the first thing you do is change the people because people are policy. Then you get real accountability legally. Then you start literally taking the bad actors and holding them accountable down in the weeds. Again, I mentioned that we had 14,000 domestic abuse incidents. Those are the ones that are reported. And do you know, in the state of Maine, we have an underreporting problem. In some places, estimates go to 70% unreported crime in places like Lewiston. A lot of families that are going through things in a rural environment, sometimes it's hard to get accountability. Sometimes people are fearful to report something that's happened. There should not be a child in this state being abused, never mind killed. We are not a third world country, and we need to start recognizing that there's no reason that we should have kids dying of overdoses. There's no reason we should have kids dying in foster care. And where does the buck stop? The buck stops at the state government. Why the hell do our Democrat majority legislators keep punching more and more money at failure? They're putting bad money after bad instead of demanding that things be right, fixing them, punishing those that aren't doing the right thing, and literally firing these people by the hundreds if necessary. It bothers me deeply. I talk to parents. I certainly know families that have gone through hell and high water, and I feel like we should be a state where every child is safe, that no risk, never mind of abuse and of dying in someone's care, but actually we have child trafficking in this state. Just as we have drug trafficking, we have human trafficking. It's horrific. I guess I came to this about 3 years ago. I bought my house in 2005 and spent a lot of time here. And about 3 years ago, it just washed over me that the state that I had left to go get an education and serve my country, when I come back, even though all my siblings are here and my cousins are here, it's not the same state. And we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Who among us, who among your listening audience right now doesn't want not just their leaders, but everybody held to a higher standard? We were raised by World War II vets. I was. And this was Norman Rockwell's America. There was abuse. There were problems. There were crimes. But it was all at a manageable lower level and people were held accountable. We're now in an environment where it's a hurricane. I used the hurricane analogy before. We're in an environment where things are flying all over the place and no one's trying to drag them down and control the environment. And I will tell you, as governor, these people are going to be gobsmacked. I am going to enforce accountability with a Republican legislature. We are going to bring accountability back to the state of Maine. And that means lives of children will be saved. We can count them. There will be metrics. The numbers are going to fundamentally change on drug overdoses, on foster care death and abuse. And all of a sudden, people are going to realize, yeah, you do something bad, you'll be caught, you'll be punished, and you might be put away for years. So don't think about it. And if you're thinking about it, go somewhere else.
So a few months ago, there was an article in Bangor Daily News saying that there was over 400,000 people now on MaineCare. What are your concerns of this being 50% or 60%? Because as of right now, I believe it's 30%.
Maine is in a healthcare crisis, and there's a lot of indicators of it. MaineCare is one. MaineCare, if people don't know, is, of course, Medicaid brought here to Maine. Our biggest problem right now in MaineCare, it's almost like a seesaw, and if you have too many people down on that end of the seesaw, then the premiums and the deductibles go up on the other end of the seesaw in the private sector. So what we need to do is we need to get people off MaineCare that don't belong on MaineCare. The president put forward a proposal that you get your Medicaid. If you are healthy and you're between the ages of 18 and 65, the federal law now says that you will get your Medicaid if you are working 20 hours a week or if you will donate your time 20 hours a week to a charity, volunteer, or if you'll go to school for 20 hours a week. Now, that's a virtuous cycle, by the way. All three of those things are good for the state, but they also get you to earn what you're getting. Interestingly, they say, well, when you put those requirements on, you're throwing people off. No, you're not. You're saying you just can't sit on the couch and keep collecting money from me and from the rest of the state that we don't have because you don't want to work. So we need to get that back in business again. The biggest problem we've got with MaineCare right now is a complete lack of accountability. They estimate that somewhere between 100 million and 500 million is consumed in fraud and waste. And there are lots and lots of examples of it. You're getting wraparound care for these illegal aliens. I am even told, and it blew my mind to hear this, that it is so unmonitored now that you have Somali and Angolan and a bunch of other minorities that are tied to the illegal alien community who are actually bringing their own relatives over from that host country, getting a knee replacement, putting them back on a plane and sending them home. That's not accountability. I don't care how rich or poor you are. You should not game the system like that. We need to get the fraud out of the system. We need to make it accountable. And it's a crazy thing how it works. Once you rebalance a ship, or let's say you rebalance your tires on a car, if you rebalance the tires, other things begin to come into, you don't shake up the shocks as much. You're not rattling the transmission as much. Your muffler doesn't fall off. Why? Because you got things back in balance again. This is what you do. When you get the MaineCare system back in balance again, now the premiums and the deductibles on the rest of that care begins to come down. Now seniors aren't worried. Now you've reestablished a sense of efficacy or an engineering integrity to the system. So what comes from that? You begin now to be able to maintain hospitals that are being properly paid on time. You begin to recruit nurses and doctors to come into the state where you can't get them now. This administration says they're all for women's care. I'm going to use that famous word bull again. They're not for women's care. They're pulling neonatal units out of hospitals right now. They're literally redlining hospitals. They're not paying the hospitals. And women are half the state, and they need that care too. And let's go back to the individual hospitals. Nobody went through that bill, or I haven't heard anybody else talking about it, that 800-page bill, and saw that they've actually redlined York Hospital. That hospital will be gone in 4 years if you don't save it. Just like, I'm going to jump the rail here and say, there's so much this administration has done that's wrong. It's not just in healthcare. They want to shut down SAPI. They want to shut down the 4 dams. There's no accountability. She lied straight out. She said, no, we're not going to shut down the dams. I'm just selling this to the Nature Conservancy, knowing full well that a day later, they're going to make an announcement that they're shutting down all the dams. And that means you're going to lose the SAPI mill and you're going to lose 6 to 10% of energy in the state of Maine, which is hydro. This is complete bull. Someone's got to say the emperor's got no clothes. Okay. And it's ugly. Okay. And we need to get after this and get the healthcare system back in balance again. And again, I'm just going to say, this is not rocket science. This isn't even medical science. This is a straightforward management issue. You need to get accountability back, affordability, access, and quality of care back into the state of Maine. And we, of all states with the oldest population, needs that kind of balance. In an age of total and complete mediocrity, it takes nothing to be great. And we can do that.
Thank you for listening to Part 1 with Republican gubernatorial candidate Bobby Charles. Make sure to tune in to Part 2 tomorrow, Sunday, November 23rd at 6:30 a.m. on VOM, The Voice of Maine.
You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.